As a divorce coach for men, I get to talk to a lot of guys who are getting back into dating after being married for 10, 20, 30, sometimes 40 years. And so I get kind of a front row seat to the mistakes that these men make. I also get to see their successes, and we're going to talk about some of that today. But my hope in this video is to point out the three major mistakes that I see men making that keep them either really stuck after divorce and unable to move forward to date at all, or taking them down this path where they just feel bitter, angry, resentful, and fearful of women. The reality is that the need for connection is a basic human need. It's right up there with our needs for food, for sleep, for clean water. Humans do not thrive. We do not stay healthy if we don't feel connected. And one of the main sources of connection that people seek is romantic connection. And so for a lot of men after divorce, they lose that source of connection. A lot of them don't have other sources of connection in their lives. And so for many of them, it's really, really scary. And it has consequences for physical health, mental health, emotional health. A lot of men really, really suffer and struggle post-divorce, and it's because they're making these three main mistakes. So the three major mistakes I see men making after divorce that keep them stuck or take them down this bitterness, fearful path around women is either getting too hung up on answering the why in the wrong way, right? So why did my ex-wife do this? Why did she make these choices? Why did we end up in this place? The second is trying to control what you're feeling, the intensity of emotion, the grief, the pain, the anger. And the third is giving up your agency to your ex-wife. And that is when you get stuck into a little bit of a victim mindset. So I'm going to go into each one of these mistakes, show you how they show up for a lot of the men that I coach and work with, and how you can overcome them to find connection after divorce. And that means both being comfortable alone with yourself, feeling connected to you, but also being able to get back out there and date without guilt or fear. When men first reach out to me, usually after one of these YouTube videos, we almost always start out by talking about the why. They have questions about why their ex-wife left, why she's blaming them, why she's being so mean, why she's making false accusations, why she seems like maybe she's okay with this or has already moved on even though it's all happening so quickly, why the marriage broke down in the first place, why she wasn't willing to work on it. Right? There are so many whys, often centered around your ex's behaviors, thought processes, and choices. And this can torture men. You guys, you know this if you're in that place. I talk to men sometimes who have been feeling stuck, unable to move forward, unable to date, unable to commit to new relationships, often unable to still focus at work or sleep well 3, 4, 6 years after divorce because they can't answer this question and it is driving them crazy. And what's interesting here is that knowing why and understanding her actions actually does help men let go and move on and make their peace with it. But most of the time, men are going about this in the wrong way. They're trying to solve this question of why with their logical, rational brain, and they're just running in loops and loops and circles. And they're like, it doesn't make sense. I didn't cheat, and I wasn't an alcoholic, and I was a good provider, and I was a good protector, and why wouldn't she work on it? And it just doesn't add up. And so the logical approach isn't working, but because they don't have another way to answer this question, they stay there and these loops just spin and spin and spin. And I often talk to men who say, my brain just won't stop. I'm stuck on this ruminating loop, but I can't solve this problem and it's making me crazy. And then of course you can't date, you can't get in a relationship with somebody else because if you don't understand what went wrong in this last marriage, if you don't understand what was happening in your ex-wife's mind, how can you know it's not going to happen again? Right? How can you recognize it's coming? How can you prevent it? So there is a really logical reason to want to know the why, but you're not solving it with logic, it's not working. And the reason for that is because the why is not just a logical question, it's also an emotional question. So you're trying to solve her actions based just on an understanding of the logic of the circumstances, but you're completely disregarding the impact of her emotional well-being. And the reality is that for humans, men and women, this is not just true of women, our actions are driven by how we feel. Human beings feel emotions because they drive us to move. When we have anxiety, we move. We get away from danger. When we're angry, we fight back, right? We fight to protect ourselves. When we're relaxed and happy, we can bond with other people. Every emotion we have drives our behaviors. And I think this is where a lot of men actually lose the logic, because they want to deny that human beings, themselves included, are emotional beings. We have strong emotions. They come up autonomically, often without our control, and they have a very strong influence on our behaviors. And so if we try to separate out the emotion or say that emotion shouldn't be a factor, we are ignoring a massive piece of what is driving human behavior. And this is also your behavior. This is not just your ex-wife. And a lot of men tend to think that they're being rational when they're actually in fight or flight. If you're feeling anxiety or you're feeling anger, you are acting in a large part based on your emotions. And being in fight or flight is a little bit like being drunk. Your brain thinks you're more rational than you are, right? Just like when you're drunk, your brain thinks you're more capable than you are. You're like, oh, I can drive. I can walk a straight line. I'm not slurring my speech. Yes, you are. And no, you can't drive. Right? But you don't see it because the effect that the alcohol has on your brain is to kind of heighten this sense of your own abilities and to remove your inhibitions. Right? Likewise, fight or flight has an effect on the brain. It makes changes in the brain. It makes us hypervigilant and hyper-aware and hypersensitive and hyper-reactive, and also super focused on a narrow frame of view. We can't see the broader picture. We're focused on the problem, on the pain. And there have been a lot of studies that show that when we're in that fight or flight state, the executive functioning parts of our brain start to go offline. So our working memory decreases, our ability to think critically and see the broader problem, that decreases. So we can't think clearly in fight or flight when we're in that emotional response, and our choices and our actions are going to be driven by those emotions. And this is just human physiology. It's how our brains work. It is not a woman thing and a man thing. It is just the reality of being human. And so if you want to understand the why behind your ex's behavior, you need to start to understand the emotions that she was feeling when she took those actions. And you need to start to understand what happens to people in fight or flight, because fight or flight drives our behaviors in stronger ways probably than any other emotion, because it is a survival response. And you might be like, yeah, but Rachel, she wasn't in any danger, right? There was no risk. Remember, I was a good husband. I was a protector. I was a provider. I didn't cheat. I didn't do all of these things. I wasn't abusive. But if she was acting fight or flight behaviors, she was feeling a fight or flight response, which meant her brain was experiencing that survival mode. And it doesn't really matter if you think that the circumstances warranted that feeling. She was feeling it. And if she was feeling it, it was for a reason. And it might have been based in those circumstances, but it might also be linked to things she experienced earlier in her life. Right? The things that trigger us into a fight or flight response, they vary person to person based on what has happened to us in the past. All of those childhood experiences shift our kind of barometer for fight or flight. How much does it take to push us into a fight or flight response? What specific situations trigger that in us? And so different situations, different circumstances can trigger people's fight or flight responses and these strong emotional responses, and thus change their behavior based on things that happened to them a long, long time ago. So if you want to understand your ex's behavior, you have to start where she was and say, okay, well, she was feeling something, and I can learn something about what she was feeling based on the way she was acting, right? Were they fight or flight behaviors? Was she acting out of anger or out of fear, right? Was she withdrawing and shutting down? That's a part of a freeze response. Was she shutting down or withdrawing? Was she lashing out in anger? Was she attacking and blaming, right? Anything that is aggressive is a fight response. Anything that is pulling away, running away, hiding is a freeze response or a flight response. And I will tell you, if you really want to understand and have a satisfying answer to the why, the best way to understand how human emotions drive human behaviors and how fight or flight impacts our actions and how childhood trauma and adverse events influence us in our adult behaviors, if you want to understand all of that for your ex-wife, don't start with your ex-wife. Start with yourself. You have the perfect experimental laboratory right here, your brain, your body, your heart, your emotions, your behaviors. Start paying attention to how you feel. Start witnessing and becoming conscious of how your feelings drive your behaviors. Start to notice when you're in fight or flight. If you experience any anxiety or anger, you're experiencing a fight or flight response. If you're experiencing overwhelm or depression, you're experiencing a freeze response. So start to notice, what does that feel like in you? How do you act when you're in those different nervous system states? The more that you get to know your internal experience, how your emotions impact your behaviors, the more other people's actions, especially their crazy or cruel or seemingly incongruous ones, are going to start to make sense for you. But you have to start by admitting that you too are having these strong emotions and these nervous system states that do impact your behavior. And this can be hard because it means admitting that you're not always this rational, logical being, and that sometimes, even when you're trying to be rational and logical, you're actually acting from emotion. And so this actually takes us into the second mistake that a lot of men make, which is trying to control or suppress the things that they feel. And in my experience, men are taught to believe that they can do this, that it's possible to control and suppress and stop your emotional reactions. And a lot of men get really, really, really good at hiding what they feel and shutting down what they feel. But it is all a big lie and an illusion. It does not work. If it did work, you wouldn't be watching these videos because you would be fine. You would be past the divorce. It wouldn't be affecting you. You wouldn't be experiencing anxiety. You'd be sleeping through the night. You'd be focused at work. You'd be able to go on dates and not be fearful or stressed or angry. Your ex-wife wouldn't have the power to trigger you. And when you talk to your lawyer, you wouldn't go into a cold sweat and be unable to focus at work the rest of the day. Suppressing emotions at best works for a short period of time. Eventually, it creates either an explosion of an emotion, which is often in the form of anger, but sometimes it's more anxiety, fear, or grief, or it starts to manifest itself as physical disease. It is very, very common for men several years out of divorce to have heart problems, blood pressure issues, all sorts of different health problems and disease processes. And often it is tied to these suppressed emotions because you're having these strong reactions in your body. Every time you feel an emotion, there are chemicals flooding through your system, right? There are peptides binding to receptors on the surface of every cell in your body. And when you're in fight or flight, it's a lot of stress hormones. There's cortisol, there's adrenaline, there's endorphins. And when you suppress an emotional state, it doesn't go away. You're just pushing it below your conscious awareness. You're basically ignoring it. It doesn't make all of those chemical processes stop. And so over time, that starts to take a toll on all of the systems in your body. And we see this again in the research around fight or flight. When you are in fight or flight, your immune system is not working as well. Your digestive system is not working as well. Your blood pressure rises, your heart rate increases, your breathing rate increases. And so when we're in these states for sustained periods of time and we're just suppressing them, ignoring them, keeping them out of our conscious awareness, it's taking a toll on all of these systems in our bodies. Right? So suppressing emotion, it either erupts at some point, or if we do it for long enough, it starts to make us sick. There's a lot of other unhelpful ways of dealing with emotions. Women are often taught to overindulge in the emotion and get caught up in the story of the emotion and tell it to themselves and keep it alive and keep it going that way. Many of us, men and women both, we use all kinds of substances, social media, movies, distractions to get away from our emotions. We buffer, we numb, we distract. We even use things that are healthy like exercise or a healthy diet. And we get so extreme and caught up and obsessed with it that we use that as a way to avoid what we're feeling. We can use work as a way to avoid what we're feeling. And this tendency to suppress or avoid emotion also keeps men stuck after divorce, and it makes it very, very difficult for them to find romantic connection with a new partner. Because one, they're exhausted because they're in this constant battle of keeping these emotions down, at bay, under control, and so they're always fighting with themselves. And then also because it keeps you in that fight or flight or freeze state. And when we're in those states, we don't connect well. It's hard for us to relate to other people, to feel empathy when we're in those states because our brain is just in this survival mode. So we don't really hear or see other people very well. And when other people see us, they can read in our body language that we're in a fight or flight response. And so we seem a little scary to them. And often what is really, really tragic, I see a lot of divorced men feeling really isolated after a divorce and feeling like people almost seem repelled by them or withdraw from them. And a lot of times it's just the reaction to you constantly being in this fight or flight or freeze state. So suppressing emotions puts you into a state where connection is really difficult and healing and moving forward is really difficult. So if we want a different result, if you want to come out of fight or flight or freeze, if you want to sleep through the night, if you want to stop fighting with yourself and actually feel safe and relaxed being alone with yourself, and if you want to go out on dates without fear or guilt and without people seeming to be repelled or scared of you, well, then we've got to do something different. Suppression's not going to get us there. And so I go into this in more detail in some of my other videos, guys, but I'll mention it briefly here. What we want to do instead is learn to be with an emotion by activating the medial prefrontal cortex of the brain. Bessel van der Kolk, who is a psychiatrist who studied PTSD for many, many years and war veterans, and he's one of the leading kind of modern thinkers about how we heal from trauma. He talks about this part of the brain as the watchtower. It's a part of the brain that's responsible for conscious awareness, and it's the only part of the brain that has direct connections to the limbic system, which is where all these emotions and fight or flight responses originate. So when we activate that part of the brain, we can actually calm these emotional responses. And so in this way, we actually can learn to control our emotions. But what you'll see is what you're doing is not really controlling it by stopping it. You're controlling it by allowing it. By allowing it to be there, to be in your body, and activating this part of your brain that allows you to experience an emotion without a panic response, without a fight or flight response. If you guys want more details about how to do that, what that means, what that looks like, go ahead and join me in my free masterclass. There's a link here and in the video description below, and it's an hour-long course that goes just full on detail about what the watchtower part of the brain is, how you can use it, and the kinds of changes that you can expect to experience when you activate that part of the brain. The third mistake that I see a lot of men making after divorce that keeps them either stuck or takes them down this route to bitterness, regret, anger, and fear towards women, which basically keeps them isolated away from women and unable to have healthy relationships, is this sense that they need their ex to stop hurting them. It's feeling like a victim. And this is really, really common because usually about 70 to 80% of the time, it's the woman who files for divorce. Right? And so there is this inherent power imbalance where she's choosing this and it's happening to you. And maybe you've tried really, really hard to stop it and it didn't work. So it's really natural and normal for a man in that situation to feel powerless, to feel helpless, and to feel like she's doing this to you and there's nothing you can do to stop it, and it's horrible. And she's also doing it to your children, which is even worse, and you can't protect them from it and you can't protect yourself from it. So of course, the brain goes into this victim mindset. And a lot of men stay here for years, feeling like, well, I can't move on, I can't heal because she's doing this to me, and she keeps doing it, right? She's still angry. She keeps bringing up custody battles. She still blames me. She tells people horrible things about me. She's mean to me when I see her. She won't tell me why. And there's a sense that I can't fix this. I have no agency. She's got to change in order for me to get through this and be okay. And guys, if this were true, you would be in serious trouble, right? Because we can't control her and we can't make her change. So I'm really, really glad to be able to tell you that it's not true. You don't need her to stop. You don't need an explanation from her. You don't need answers from her. And you don't even need her behaviors to change. You don't even need her to be nicer. You can heal without her. You can move forward without her. And you can get to a place where you are not only safe inside of yourself, feeling whole and complete, but where you are sleeping well, eating healthily, exercising, focused at work, present with your kids, and even dating without the fear of being put back in the situation again. You can do all of that without her. But we've got to take your emotional power back. We have to take your agency back from her. And I am not saying that her words don't have an impact, that her actions don't have an impact. They do. And that's actually what got me into this work with men in the first place. Was I started to work with some male clients, and I started to realize that there's so much toxic feminine empowerment rhetoric and teaching and coaching out there, and that so many women are empowering themselves or setting themselves free by villainizing the men in their lives and blaming them for everything that's wrong in the woman's life. And I had not realized until I started working with men quite how toxic all of that was, or how many men were internalizing it. They were taking it on. They were feeling like, maybe I'm the narcissist, maybe I'm the monster, maybe I'm bad, broken, horrible in all of these ways because she's saying it and she's my person. And if she can think this of me, then maybe it's true. And it does have an impact when you share your life with someone, when you sacrifice for them, when you build a future with them, and then they accuse you of really painful, difficult things. Of course, you question yourself and you wonder if that's true. And you look inside of yourself and you have doubts and you have shames and you have things that you are afraid might be wrong or bad or broken. So it does have an impact, a very, very real impact. And you can still take back your power, and you do it by figuring out who you really are, by going in and looking at all of those darkest places, those shameful thoughts, those fearful feelings, those actions that you regret, and figuring out who's the man behind all of that. And I will tell you this, I have done this with a lot of men. Every single time we find a good person. I have not met a horrible person yet, and I am starting to believe that they don't exist. I think that everything, even our worst behaviors, even our sickest behaviors, even our craziest behaviors, they are all driven by positive intentions. And often the awful things we do, the crazy things that we do as human beings, often they are from a fight or flight response. It is a way that we are trying to cope, trying to survive. And often we've got layers of past pain and trauma that we haven't dealt with because we've been suppressing it or distracting or numbing or dealing with it in some other unhelpful way. But I have never yet met a person whose worst behaviors were not driven by some positive intention. And it's almost always a desire to feel safe and loved. And unfortunately for many, many, many of us, I would say most of us, it's hard to feel safe and loved because of things that have happened to us in the past. But we can heal those things by going inside, by learning to be with your emotions in a different way, and by really getting to know yourself from the inside out. And what you get in the process, it is so, so cool because it overcomes all of these mistakes, you guys. When you do that internal work of getting to know you deeply, you also get a map of people, of how people work, of how our thoughts and emotions impact our behaviors and our actions. And now you start to look around at this crazy world and people doing crazy things, and it all starts to make more sense because you understand what's going on behind it and where it's coming from. And it also becomes a lot less scary because you start to see the positive intentions behind people's worst behaviors. And so you get to start looking around the world and realizing that it is full of people who want to feel safe and who want to feel loved, and that they're really not that different from you, men and women both. So if you want to free yourself from these 3 mistakes that keep men stuck or take them down that path to bitterness and regret, then we've got to get you some skills to activate the watchtower in your brain and start to get to know yourself really deeply and intimately from the inside out so that you can know other people too. The best way I know to do that is to teach you the skill of limbic awareness, which is exactly what that masterclass I mentioned earlier is all about. So please come with me into that masterclass. I will tell you more about this skill, and I'll also give you some examples of men who have used this successfully, who have gone from not being able to sleep at night to shaking uncontrollably throughout the day, from anger and fear and being so triggered by their ex-wives, to dating, to getting engaged and married again, to having healthier, happier relationships, to feeling connected, to being grounded, to being okay being alone with themselves. It's possible, even from the darkest, hardest of places. And I am so blessed and lucky that I get to see men making that transition every single day. So come with me to the masterclass and let's talk about how to get you there as well.